Hello everyone, welcome back to Omegon 2 Electric Boogaloo. Today I want to talk about something that could well in and of itself be a Halls of Injustice, but it would be a part 2 to somebody we've already covered. On August the 31st, 2021, on the Omegon channel, I made a Halls of Injustice on Gary Glitter, aka Paul Gadd. It wasn't by any stretch of the imagination the most in-depth analysis of his rise, his fall, his rise and his fall. Because yes, he during the early 90s got a renaissance after rising to fame in the 70s as a part of the glam rock, hair rock genre, which was back then certainly quite amusing because it was, as the best kept secret in music, all just a wig everyone. In retrospect, as he got older, it became more apparent, mostly because the hair got wilder. During his original rise, he committed crimes, but the statute of limitations applied to when the person who he affected then came forward. It was much later, and was all eventually thrown out because of the issues concerning statute of limitations. Eventually, in the late 90s, Gary Glitter got busted. He took a computer in for repair, and this one he couldn't get out of. Over 4,000 indecent images of children were on that computer. Eventually, he pled guilty to over 50 charges. Now, he received a really pathetic sentence and served a mere few months in prison. When he left, he said the following:
I deeply regret doing what I was sent to prison for. I've served my time. I want to put it all behind me and live my life.
Now, if you are somebody trying to move past this, what you don't want to do is make it look really obvious that not only were you guilty of everything else you've ever been accused of, but that you aren't actually remorseful for what you did in the first place. So I guess what you don't do is skip town and country, go to Cuba, get yeeted to Mexico, go to Gibraltar, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam. But in the case of Gary Glitter, that's exactly what he did. He skipped country and he went on the run. During a rather lengthy documentary titled Come Home, Gary Glitter, it was discovered that Gary barely ever spent more than a few days in one location because he knew people were onto him. He knew people were after him. That's not surprising when in your wake you leave a very, long line of people who are very young, minors in fact, who are in turn pregnant with love childs as they're called. It's not what they are in the slightest. I think we can all agree here that's not what they are. At some point in the 80s, Gary Glitter was declared bankrupt because his career was done. His career had a renaissance because of a rather catchy Christmas tune he wrote. Although I don't think it was written by him. I don't think any of his music was. But he owned the rights to it. And this fascinated me because I went and looked on Spotify, and I couldn't help but notice Gary Glitter gets over 686,000 monthly listeners. Until I bothered to look it up, I thought he was benefiting from this. Turns out though, he sold the rights to his music in 1997. But someone is still marketing this crap. I don't think that's a good idea. It's like seeing lost profits on there as well. One might go so far as to say, if you put material onto platforms where it can be monetized, that originates from a nonce, you are still in effect kind of promoting the nonce. I know you got to make your money back, I fully get that, but this is probably not the way forward. Skip ahead to 2015, Gary Glitter was convicted of, a number of rather unsavory crimes. On the 27th of February 2015, Judge Alistair McCreath sentenced Gary Glitter to 16 years in prison. Now, he's been in and out of prison in a number of countries now. This has gone too far. 16 years to me should be 16 years behind bars. However, that's not why he was trending. But he had on a number of occasions sought to have his convictions not necessarily quashed, more the sentence reduced. From 2015 to 2018, he was in HM Prison Albany. 2018, transferred to HM Prison The Verne, which is a low-security prison. He tried to get out then because of the COOF as well. There were issues with COOFness in 2020, 2021 and 2022 in fact. But we skip ahead because on the 3rd of February 2023, Gary Glitter was trending on Twitter, and it wasn't because of the dear old lady who has his hairstyle that I showed earlier. No, that was just in the trending tag. He was released from prison on license. The reason why is because sentencing guidelines in place at the time of his offences meant that his sentence is half in prison, half out. Something I fundamentally and many fundamentally disagree with, not least because his history just shows he cannot be trusted around anyone. He might be able to fly under the radar, but a creature of habit he most certainly is, and eventually he will regress back to his natural state. Some attribute his behaviour to that of his rather poor upbringing, or his desperation to make it big as a superstar, before finding Gary Glitter and pushing ahead with that with somebody that helped write the songs. Before that, he tried many different iterations to be successful. He got lucky because the music was simplistic and really catchy because of its simplicity, something which at the time was a novel idea. Owing to his bail conditions, he lives within a bail hostel at present, and this is where some rather interesting turn of events have taken place. Locals that live near it are holding a vigilante protest outside the gate, where they have in turn been confronted by the police. When motorists go past this hostel, these vigilantes, as they've been dubbed, shout at the passers-by, "Watch out, Glitter's in there." One of the main bones of contention isn't necessarily that it's been released, it's that where he is being released to, the hostel he is staying at as per his license agreement, is very close to a number of schools. This doesn't feel like rehabilitation or assisting in his transition to law-abiding citizen for the remainder of his days, which I'm sure there aren't many of anyway, he is quite old. No, this comes across as a man surrounded by apple trees being told he's not allowed to eat them. The temptation might get too much for him. It is also alleged that in this hostel he is treated like royalty, with staff providing room service for him at all times, which many again have a bone of contention with because he should still be in prison. Regardless of his age, 78, he should not be treated as if he is better than the oikari on the other side of the fence that want to cave his head in. There are actually some bands market themselves as anti-what he is music in the punk genre. They featured in an earlier mentioned documentary, the Come Home Gary Glitter documentary that is, many of whom basically restate what the majority of British people think of people like Gary Glitter, the first person arrested under Operation U-Tree, along with other allies of his in fact, Max Clifford being an obvious one, Rolf Harris another. These people are not good people. And in the case of Gary, he has shown time and time again, he has no remorse. In fact, the moment he got busted and left the country, he would allow the temptations and vices of where he was in the world to take control. He would use his position, his wealth, which in poorer nations, many of whom he stayed in, he could flaunt, to get what he wanted out of people who were vastly more vulnerable than he was. Although since he is currently being held in a hostel behind a closed, gated community, I think he might start to understand how it feels to be vulnerable, although he'd feel a lot more vulnerable if those gates weren't there, or the police coming by to protect him, because they seem to have more of a duty of care to him than they do other things. Now, in a rather interesting turn of events, a father marched his young daughter to the front door of the bail address, demanding an explanation from staff as to why they are protecting a child sex offender. The parent, who told reporters his name was David Jones, said that staff at the hostel asked him to leave and told him they called the police after he sought the explanation. The father then spoke to the mirror and said, "There's schools all around, I'm just appalled at what's going on. That's what my tax pounds are going on, to protect someone like this. I would just like someone to explain what's going on. Explain to my 6-year-old daughter who you're protecting in there. It's her that needs protecting, not him. It's our children that need protecting." This is totally different to America, where you can go on a website and find out who lives in your neighborhood. Here it doesn't happen, and it's completely wrong. Why does he have more rights than a 6-year-old girl? He's 78 years old, he should have just died in prison. You will be hard-pressed to find anyone that disagrees with this. Those that do, usually being really pedantic, because they can't help it apparently. In the case of Gary Glitter, he shouldn't be given such service. He is restricted in his ability to travel to this country and this country alone, but he should have served the remainder of his time in a prison. He should not be granted any luxury, any freedom. It's estimated that Gary Glitter, even though he receives no royalties from music because he sold it all anyway, still has a considerable wealth of his own anyway. That silly little bish could easily buy a house somewhere else, somewhere isolated, with no internet access, let's go with no water and electric as well, I think he needs to put in the work for this one. Live out his years quietly away from literally all sentient life. So can we send him to Black Dolphin? I think that'd be a great idea. In fact, I highly recommend it.